Hey everyone, let's jump into Adobe Illustrator. Illustrator is software for creating logos, posters, and illustrations. In this software, we don't use a brush to change the color of pixels on a canvas. Instead, we create our art by drawing shapes called vectors. I'm going to go to File, New, and this is the New Document dialog box. And here, I tell Illustrator if the new document I'm about to create, if it's for print media, like if it's a poster, for example, or a postcard, or if it's for web media. And there's some other options in here as well, but web is one that I typically do because if you go under Advanced, if you choose web, you get RGB as your color mode, and for whatever reason, I like to work in RGB for my color mode, unless I know I'm going to have to print something. If I'm designing something for print media, I choose print, and I get CMYK as my color mode, which is what you want. If you do happen to choose web and you're going to do logo work, I would probably uncheck this Align New Objects to Pixel Grid. Just a little bit of a pro tip there. Otherwise, the shapes that you create end up kind of snapping to the pixel grid, which can be very annoying when you're trying to get different vertices to snap to one another. So I'm actually going to turn that off, and I am going to stick with RGB because I'll be creating content that is not for print, but it is for animation, and yeah. The rest of these settings I'm going to leave the same and click OK. So now that I'm in here, let's create some shapes. Like I said, Illustrator is a program for creating illustrations out of shapes. These shapes are called vectors, and instead of being pixels, the vectors are points that are stored mathematically, and then the computer just kind of draws lines between those points and sometimes fills in the color. So if you want to come over here and find, say, the rectangle tool, you can drag out a rectangle, and then I'm going to switch to my selection tool and select it, and I can move it around with the selection tool. I can also, if I bring my cursor out here, I can rotate, I can scale the shape, and notice that even though I'm scaling up, we don't really see any evidence of damage from that you would see if you were editing pixels. So we can actually play around with the lines that are being drawn here. If I come up here to the top, you'll notice I have two colors. I currently have the shape selected, and you can choose this first color on the left is called the fill color. It sets the color that's used to fill in the shape. And then the second color is called the stroke color, and that's the color that's used around the perimeter of the object. It might be hard to see. Now I have a setting here where I can also change the stroke weight, so I can bump that up to be a very weighty stroke. You can also even change some other properties of the stroke, make it so that its weight changes over time, or over distance rather. And I can choose from some presets, or there's a whole variety of different kinds of strokes that you can find and create. Here's one, for example, that's meant to look maybe hand-drawn, maybe like someone scribbled it out of chalk. If I turn off the fill color, you can see that looks kind of cool. So in any case, today, let's create something here in Illustrator. Let's create a character, or a simple character. And I want to show you one of the most powerful tools for creating shapes in Illustrator, and that's called the pen tool. It's over here somewhere, but the keyboard shortcut is P, so you can just hit P. There it is. And with the pen tool, we can drag out points, or we can click to add points rather, and then if you click and drag, you can drag out Bezier control handles for these points, so you can get just the exact shape that you're looking for if you know what you're doing. Now if you haven't worked with the pen tool before, it is kind of difficult to learn, and which is why the best way to learn it is to get in here and practice. So you've already seen we have this selection tool, which is this black arrow. I can click and move things around, and I can rotate and scale them. But there's this second white arrow, which is our direct selection tool. There's a very similar setup in Flash where it's called the sub-selection tool. And the idea is the same. With the direct selection tool, I can click on the individual vertices that make up the shape. So if I click on a vertice, I can move it around to change the shape. I can also click on the Bezier handles these little handle points out here for any Bezier curves, so I can change the way the curve is interpolated between the 2 points. There's some other tricks you can do. For example, I'm using the direct selection tool to click on the stroke between 2 points. I can kind of manipulate the curve a little bit that way as well. It doesn't let me do that with these straight sections. Which brings me to an important point. If you want to change your interpolation from this right here, where you just see straight lines that's linear, to this right here, which is a continuous Bezier curve, the way you do it is under the pen tool, there is something called an anchor point tool. And the keyboard shortcut for that is Shift-C. So go ahead and practice that. P for pen and Shift-C for the convert anchor point tool. Now, what I can do is I can point that over top of a linearly interpolated control point, and I can drag out these Bezier handles. Now, the Bezier handles, you'll notice if I switch to my direct selection tool, if I click on them, they're locked at 180 degrees from each other. This tries to ensure that this particular curve is continuous and doesn't have any points. If we switch to the anchor point tool again, Shift-C, and you click on one of these Bezier handles, you can click and you can break your Bezier handle so that it's no longer 180 degrees, it's no longer continuous. Now what that does is that creates a corner in your shape. Okay, so if you're trying to create a smooth area that is not a corner, then the secret is of course to have these Bezier handles be locked at 180 degrees. So if you have any points, say like this one, and you want to convert them back into continuous, you can click and drag out a continuous curve. Or if you want to convert this back into linear, you just click on it once and it converts back. Using these tools we can create some interesting shapes. I'm going to select and delete the content I have, and then I'm going to switch to the Ellipse tool, which is hidden under the rectangle tool if you click and hold, or keyboard shortcut L, and I can click and drag out an ellipse. Now what I want to do is I can select these anchor points with my direct selection tool, and I can move them around. So if I want to change the shape of this a little bit, that's not too interesting yet. I'm going to hit P to switch to my pen tool, and I want to add a point to this curve. Now if I want to ensure that I'm adding a point to an existing curve, I can actually switch to the more specific Add Anchor Point tool. That is the plus keyboard shortcut. So I can click on this curve to add additional curves to it. I'm going to add two, one on either side of this bottom curve, and then I want to take this bottom point out. So I'm going to hit minus on the keyboard and click on it to get rid of it. And then I want to hit Shift-C and drag out a continuous curve from both of these points. And I'm going to hold down Shift so that that continuous curve is locked horizontally. Now I just want to note here that after I select the anchor points, I'm using the arrow keys on the keyboard to nudge the points 1 pixel in any direction. If I hold Shift while I press the arrow keys, I can nudge the points 10 pixels in any direction. This will be a character, so I want to give this character some interesting color. So I'm going to come up here with it selected, and I'm going to choose to drop in this bluish color for the fill. Now I want to choose a similar color for the stroke. I want it to be the same color, only darker. So what I'm going to do is choose the same swatch for my fill color, or excuse me, for my stroke color. And then I want to edit that color. So I'm going to come over here and find the color panel. If you can't find the color panel, we can go up to Window, Color. And what I'm going to do is I can edit the currently selected color. So you'll notice if I drag these bars around, I can add more red, for example, to this current color. Now, notice I'm editing the fill color, not the stroke color. I want to be editing the stroke color. The reason why I'm editing the fill is because the fill is the one that's pictured on top right here. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to flip these two colors so that I've got the blue back on the inside. So I'm going to click this little arrow to swap the two colors. And then I want to click on this stroke outline right here, and that's going to put the stroke in front of the fill color, and that tells me that I'm now editing the stroke color. So I want my stroke color to be based off of that same swatch. So, can I find it again? I think I have to come over here. There we go. And now that I've got the fill selected, I want to basically make this existing color only darker. And in order for me to make it darker, I actually have to reduce red, green, and blue. But if I don't do it just right, I'm going to accidentally shift the hue of the color to something that's a similar blue, but maybe just a little bit different. So instead of mixing the color using RGB, I want to mix using hue, saturation, brightness. If I come up here to this little flyout menu, you'll notice I can change my color mixing here to HSB, hue, saturation, brightness. If I do that, I can just bring the brightness down until this shape has got a nice outline that isn't straight black. It's a little softer than straight black, and it's just a little bit more appealing now. So that's pretty cool. Now the next thing I probably want to do here is I want to give this shape some shadow. Okay, so again, this is kind of just a gumdrop type shape. In order for me to give it shadow, I'm first going to copy the existing shape that I have. So I'm going to do that by hitting Control-C. If I paste using Control-V, it's going to paste the same shape but offset. And I want to actually paste the same shape in exactly the same place. Now, there's two ways to do this. If I hit Control-F, it will paste what I copied in front of what I currently have selected. If I hit Control-B, it will paste what I have copied behind what I currently have selected. So I'm just going to hit Control-F or Control-B, in this case Control-F, and that's going to paste a copy. And how do you know that you've got two copies stacked? Well, I should probably introduce the Layers panel. So if you come over here, you can find the Layers panel. If you can't find it over there, you can go to Window, Layers, and the Layers panel shows you all of the layers in your document, and every layer and every object in the layer is selectable in this panel. Not only that, but you can see all the objects nested inside of one another. So for this layer 1 layer, if I click this little disclose arrow, I can see all of the objects on this layer. It's two paths. I can select the one behind by clicking this little circle, or I can select the one in front by clicking this little circle. So I'm going to select the one in front, and I want it to be a shadow. Essentially what I'm going to do is change the shape of this layer, make it like black, and then put it over top of the other layer like it's a shadow. So the shadows don't need a stroke, so I'm going to come up here and turn off the stroke by choosing none. And then for the fill color, I'm going to choose black. So there's my shadow. Now just so I don't accidentally edit this shape right here, I'm going to click in this space next to this eyeball, and that's going to lock the layer. Now if I have this layer turned on, I can only edit this layer and not the layer behind it. So let's do that. I'm going to add a couple more anchor points and maybe move around the existing ones. And depending on the style you're going for, these shadows don't have to be super realistic. They can be just, a little stylized. So I've got this shadow here, and you'll notice that it is straight black. You probably never want your shadows to be completely black. So what we want to do is lighten it up a little bit. But if I were to just come in here and change its fill color to, say, a medium gray, the problem is that this gray shadow is ostensibly on top of this surface that's also blue. So, at the very least, the shadows should be the same shade of blue, only darker. So what I'm going to do is switch this back to black. So select the shadow, set it back to black. And what I want to do is instead of changing the color of the shape, I want to change its transparency. I can do that by finding the opacity, or excuse me, the transparency panel, or if I've got the shape selected, I can just come up here to the top toolbar and change the opacity there. Something like 20% would be an appropriate amount for a shadow. Now that looks better than the black, but you'll notice that my shadow overlaps my stroke, and that creates some weird noisiness in the overall look and feel of the character. Really what I want is I want this shadow to go up to the stroke but not overlap the stroke. Well, the solution here would be for me to break this object, which is currently really two objects. It's this background shape and this shadow shape over top of it. I'm going to break it into three objects. So I'm going to have a background blue, I'm going to have a middle ground shadow, and on top of the shadow I'm going to have a stroke in the foreground. So here's what that looks like. I unlock this object, I select it, I hit Control C, Control F to paste in front, and then I want to move that layer up above the shadow layer. Now because this top layer has a fill, we can no longer see the shadow. Okay, so what I'm going to do is come in here and turn off the fill on this top layer. So the top layer, if I hide the other two layers, is just the stroke. The middle layer is just the somewhat transparent shadow, and the bottom layer has got the, in this case, it's got the fill and the stroke. Now if you think about it, if my top layer's got the stroke, my bottom layer doesn't need it. So I'm going to turn off stroke on my bottom layer. So here we go. I've got a background layer, a shadow layer, and then I've got a stroke layer. And now I've got a character started that looks kind of interesting. So I'm going to save my document. Control S will save, and I'll just choose a place to save it. And I guess I'll call it Dude, because that's what I originally called this character that this is based off of. I called him Dude, which is kind of lame, but whatever. So I'm going to select all three of these shapes, just kind of drag out a marquee over top of them, and with the three of them selected, I want to group them together. So I'm going to hit Control G to group, and now you'll notice that they show up over here in the Layers panel as one object. Now I can actually hit the Disclose arrow next to that object to see that the three original objects are just inside of that one nested object. So I can move around the shape as one shape now. To give my character better appeal, I want the weight of the stroke to vary a bit. Find the Stroke Weight tool on the left. With this tool, we can click on a stroke to manipulate its weight in a particular location. Take some time to make your character look a little more interesting by varying its stroke weights. I want the stroke weight to be thick in some places and thinner in others. Now let's quickly create some feet for this guy. Press Ctrl C to make a copy of the body and Ctrl F to paste it in front. Use the selection tool to rotate, scale, and translate the copy into a foot. Spend some time adjusting the path of the shadow. After adjusting the shadow, use the Stroke Weight tool to give the character's feet more visual interest. Position the foot behind the body and make a copy by clicking and dragging while holding Alt. Flip the foot by using the Reflect tool or by going to Object, Transform, Reflect in the main menu. Continue making adjustments to the shadows if necessary. Now let's give this guy some hands. Press L to switch to the Ellipse tool and drag out an ellipse. Hold Shift to force it into a circle. If the circle isn't the color that you want, use the eyedropper tool to sample color from another shape. Press the I button to switch to the eyedropper tool. Instead of using a stroke, I want to show you how to simulate a stroke by layering together two fills. I'm going to increase the size of the shape, but instead of scaling it up, I want to tell it to expand outward from its edges. With the shape selected, go to Object, Path, Offset Path in the main menu. I'll create a larger shape by expanding outwards 5 pixels. Now I want this shape to use the darker blue color for its fill. Press I to switch to the eyedropper tool. Click on a shape that uses the darker blue in its stroke. Notice that I've given my selected shape a stroke but no fill. I want to swap these two colors. So find and click the Swap button that's next to the two color swatches. Now I can move the light blue layer to simulate variable stroke weight. Now I want to add a shadow layer to this hand. Copy the light blue fill and paste a copy. Change its color to black. Since the hand is spherical, I want the shadow to be a crescent shape. The easiest way to create complex shapes is by combining simpler shapes. I'm going to make a crescent shape by subtracting the area of one circle from the area of another circle. Once I have the circle selected, find the Pathfinder panel. This panel gives me a variety of ways to combine shapes. The first button lets me merge different shapes together. The second button subtracts a foreground layer from a background layer. Press the second button to perform the subtraction. After creating the crescent, I'm having some trouble positioning it back over the original fill. To solve this problem, select both objects and find the Align panel. Set the shadow's opacity to 20%. As a quick reminder, here's how the hand is constructed. We have a shadow object that sits above a blue object that sits above a dark blue object. Group these objects together. Now that we're getting several different objects in our document, we should consider naming the objects so that we can stay organized. In the Layers panel, double-click on an object's name to rename it. Let's name this object Hand-Left. Make a copy of the hand, reposition it, and rename it Hand-Right. Take some time to name your other objects too. Now let's create some eyes. Using the Ellipse tool, create a white circle for an eye. Make a copy of the circle, and using the eyedropper tool, set the copy to use the dark blue stroke. I want you to lock all of your other layers to prevent accidentally editing them while we work on the eye. Press A to switch to the Direct Selection tool, and drag out a marquee to select the control points of multiple objects. In this case, the control points of the two layers that make up the eye. Using the Direct Selection tool and/or the Pen tools, create an interesting shape for the eye. Finally, add a black circle for a pupil. I want to group these objects into a special kind of object called a symbol. A symbol is like a prefab that we can use over and over again. Select all of the objects that make up the eye and press F8 to create the symbol. Give the symbol a name and click OK. We can now find this symbol in the Symbols panel. We can even drag out more instances of this symbol. Say we want to edit the symbol. We can do that by double-clicking on any instance of it. This isolates the symbol so that we can only edit its contents. After adding red eyebrows, I can exit the symbol editor by clicking on the back arrow to take me back to the main canvas. Now the great thing about a symbol is that if we change the original definition of the symbol, all of the instances of it will be updated. We can also edit a symbol by double-clicking on it in the Symbols panel. Well, let's go back and remove that eyebrow. Okay, eyebrow deleted. Now while we're in here, let's play around with the eye stroke weights. After finishing up the eyes, let's add a line for the mouth. I want the endpoints of this stroke to be rounded, so select the stroke and find the stroke panel. In this panel, set the stroke's caps to rounded. Then adjust the stroke weight of the mouth. Finally, use the Convert Anchor Point tool to curve the mouth. Finally, let's make a logo for our dude. I'm going to start with some text. Press T to switch to the Type tool and add a text field that says Dude. Always spend time picking out a good-looking font for your designs. I'm going to go with Century Gothic Bold. I think for the design of the logo, I want to try a figure ground reversal. That is, I want the text to form the negative space in the logo. So I'm going to have the text be punched out of a silhouette of the dude. So I can use the Layers panel to select and copy just the shape that I want. Once I have everything positioned the way I want, I can change the text to white to visualize what this logo might look like. However, the white text is still there. I need to punch it out of the background. The simplest approach is to use the Pathfinder panel that we used earlier, but we will have to convert our text into paths or outlines. Essentially, we have to convert the text into a shape or a collection of shapes first. To do this, find Type, Create Outlines in the main menu. The text is now a group of paths and compound paths. Select the layers and the background shape and find the Pathfinder panel. Try the Divide option, then ungroup the result. Select and delete the appropriate shapes, then regroup what's left over. And there you have it. Well, this has been just a quick introduction to Adobe Illustrator. I hope that you found it helpful, and thank you very much for watching.